one, he hasn't been on in about a month, and two, somebody else isn't on, and we get to ply him with questions about what goes on outside our corner, because Thom is a very engaged guy. And
yeah, but while you were gone, I did ask him if he just wanted to be part of the Live from the Heartland show team.
Yeah, you asked him that before I left, and I'm very glad.
So you did accept?
Thank you.
He's not saying if he's accepting.
I'm here.
Oh, he's here. So, Thom, you were involved with the the Community Media Workshop, and to my understanding, over the years, I've been to some of your events and I've read your materials. You train community organizations on how they can get their goals, their aspirations, what their projects are into the media, and that has led you into a lot of contact with the Chicago media in all of its incarnations. It's shutting down a little bit, less reporters. So it's more important than ever that we have people who are concerned about the fifth estate. And you got government, you got a lot of things, but you have to have a media. You have to have journalists who do great work. So tell us a little bit about the Community Media Workshop.
Well, since 1989, thank you, Michael and Katie. The nub of what we've tried to do with the Community Media Workshop is make sure that all voices are in the public square. And if it's only the mayor and aldermen arguing issues of the day, there's going to be a lot missing. And we can see that the way, whatever other issue we get into talking about this morning, if we don't get that community voice, if we don't get the taxpayer's voice into the public discussion, which is primarily framed by media of different forms, whether that was 20 years ago or today, I think the major difference is, I mark my career in this arena is moving from faxes to Facebook. It's very true that 20 years ago, if you wanted to get a story in the Tribune, having a fax machine was kind of an essential tool. Today, figuring out how to get video up on your Facebook page is probably as important as the occasional story that might appear in a Tribune or Sun-Times. The media, the so-called legacy media, still plays an important role, I think, but we have so many other platforms that we can deliver our stories and message on. Our work is actually richer today, I think, because people are closer to the point of contact with their audience in their storytelling, and that makes this pretty exciting. Other things don't change. I'm going to plug just two things this morning besides our media guide and other tools.
We're here for you, brother.
On January 29th, in the midst of this upsurge in violence that particularly youth of our city are trying to live through, we are gathering youth groups that work on anti-violence stuff and keeping people engaged and safe after school with the media, January 29th at Columbia College from 10 to 12 in the morning. This is repeating something we did last summer at the kind of the outset of the upsurge in gun violence that we were seeing in the headlines. What we're trying to do is to get the media to move beyond shotgun headlines and to talk more substantively about how do we defeat this epidemic. And
what are you calling this gathering?
We are calling this gathering one of the continuing series of We're Not Alone.
The Community Media Workshop.
The Community Media Workshop, We're Not Alone Forum, where there'll be basically a speed dating thing going on, introducing to journalists from all different kinds of media to youth organizations they ought to be quoting the next time they're covering a murder victim, a drug bust, or something else. To move beyond just what the police department is putting out or the state attorney's office is putting out, we think is important to engage the community, and I'm sure your next guest will also speak to this in a richer way. And then the other thing that kind of keeps our doors open is our annual Studs Terkel Awards, which we announced this past week. Dave Hoekstra of the Sun-Times, a longtime feature writer, maybe best known to people as a travel writer, but not your usual travel writer.
Right.
He does music too, and he is an avid Cub fan.
And he's a great foodie as well.
Yeah.
Fernando Diaz, who's managing editor of Hoy, the Tribune Spanish daily, and Megan Cottrell is our kind of less known, up-and-coming young journalist. She blogs regularly for the Chicago Reporter. I first got to know her back when the plan for transformation of public housing was first announced, at the very time the Tribune and Sun-Times and others were cutting back on their public affairs, public housing reporting. Megan was there as a young blogger, really keeping people up to date and informed about what the CHA was up to. So we're very proud of this latest group of graduates. Our Stud Circle benefit will take place on March 14th. At Columbia College's Film Roll Cinema. All this and more, you can find out details at communitymediaworkshop.org. Or if you're driving around, just remember newstips.org, because you get to us that way too.
Right.
You know, one of the reasons I always like having Thom here is that we get to have conversations about stuff that's going on. And I would like to just start off talking a little bit about the media here in Chicago. And to really start it off, I don't read Hoy very much. It is owned by the Tribune. It is in Spanish. I actually can understand a lot of times reading Spanish better than conversation. Más despacio, por favor, I always say. But I would like you to give us, let's talk a little bit about the media, but give me a little insight into the politics, the direction of Hoy, and what your take on it is.
Well, Hoy is very different than other Tribune products because the editorial staff, and there's a great YouTube video that shows in Spanish one of their editorial meetings with Fernando kind of in charge that includes, because there are Hoys in other cities. The Tribune has one in LA, and I forget what other cities right now. But
Hoy means today.
And it's fascinating because I can also only kind of pick up on nouns and verbs when I'm looking at a video clip like this, but they clearly have a far broader perspective.
That only leaves out the adverbs and adjectives.
I know. They clearly have a far broader perspective in their editorial mix than just what happened in Chicago yesterday. There's a much more international cast, a lot more attention paid to Central and South America than we get in our regular newspapers. That's understandable given the constituency they're writing for, but it brings, to my mind, much more of a sort of New York Times flavor to this world that we're all part of that's indeed a lot closer and tighter to where we are here in Rogers Park. And so if I were able to read Spanish, I'd probably have Hoy on my daily reading list because their editorial mix is so much broader.
Where did Mr. Diaz hail from? And I don't mean national, I mean work-wise. Where did he do his previous media work, do you know?
Well, ironically, he was...
did he come from L.A.?
He is, you know, I'm forgetting now, but you can get his bio on our website.
Okay.
I'm sorry I don't have it committed to memory.
No, that's all right.
But he had an interesting startup here in Chicago with Chi-Town Daily News, one of our first online media outlets.
Sure.
But he really started at Columbia College working on the school paper. I remember him as an undergrad there because that's where the media workshop is based. And he also, you know, really cut his teeth at the Chicago Reporter. So we have someone who, when he got to Chicago, was here to go to Columbia and really dug in deep, both on what kind of media outlets he worked with and the kind of investigative reporting he did early in his career. He's quite a marvelous talent in town, as is his staff. They're quite remarkable. On
the national level, Newsweek had printed its last edition. And last print edition, and now they're going to be online. And I don't know if they charge or not, but what about here in Chicago? Anything? Anyone downsizing? Anyone growing? Any good news on the journalist front?
There is a lot going on in the media landscape as we continue to try to discover what the new business model might be. But starting with the Tribune itself coming out of bankruptcy, and probably we'll be reading headlines the next few months about different people buying pieces of the Tribune. The Tribune that we grew up with is no longer going to be by the end of this year. It's going to be broken up into many different pieces. Ironically, this week, even the Sun-Times is looking at parts of the Tribune empire to buy and pick up.
So the Sun-Times will be the main player.
I'm not saying that. It's still a pretty thin paper itself.
Yeah.
In fact, most of the stuff they're interested in is probably in other markets than Chicago, ironically. The current owner of the Sun-Times, suburban, but also out of state, which I don't quite understand why the current owners are looking out of state, but there's a lot of interesting Tribune broadcast and print properties that many different buyers, including Rupert Murdoch, are looking at. I wouldn't be surprised if Murdoch tries to get the LA Times. He might even bid on the Chicago Tribune, which will really mean a big change. We have had just in the last 2 months the introduction of a major new local news outlet called DNA Info.
Right.
Chicago. People like what they're getting there because it is such a new edition of local news, even as our regular papers have been cutting back on local news coverage, which we've documented in some of our research the last few years. There has been a net loss in actual number of local news stories. DNA Info is trying to do its best to begin to fill in the gaps. They've hired about 12 reporters who are scattered around. There's one here in Rogers Park, and there are posts generally almost every day about news in and around Rogers Park, Edgewater,
Right.
that we were not getting, especially since the Lerner papers
Right,
died.
exactly.
On the broadcast side, there continue to be shifts. The media landscape is going to be a continuing intriguing story. The net bottom line, to my mind, is we're going to have fewer major outlets and more smaller ones, although some of the smaller hyperlocal ones are themselves having struggles. One major hyperlocal news outlet serving the Lincoln Square area announced it's going to close in the next month because they can't make it go. Lincoln Square Journal, Mike Forche's little
right.
empire
Right.
in 3 different neighborhoods, he wants to turn over to a nonprofit because he's not been able to make it work.
Well, I think Rogers Park is uniquely poised to accept an online vehicle as its community newspaper, since it's been one of the bloggiest hoods for many years.
Our research actually showed it to be the most blogged neighborhood, although the most trafficked
Some of these blogs
site
really are terrible.
is Uptown Upbeat actually has the biggest traffic still of all the hyperlocal news sites that we've been tracking around the city.
You've got the research.
Well, I just got to say, I think that, we used to put out the Heartland Journal, which was a quarterly paper up through 2005, from 1979. And I think we should do it again. Put it online.
Is that what you want to say?
That's what I'd want to say.
Okay.
And I would,
well, that's more than a local journal.
I'd like to get both of you guys involved in it.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm already involved.
Stay tuned, comrade brothers and sisters. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the inauguration, because I had hoped to go, but I got talked out of it. And Katie, you were there last year.
Not last year.
4 years ago, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, who's got something to say about the inauguration? We got about the speakers,
let's see.
the drum groups.
I don't think you're going to get 1 million African Americans standing 5 hours in sub-freezing weather this time.
You know,
Just my guess.
They did last time.
I know. I was
we have
there.
a working government, and the inauguration is an important liturgical break in an already very busy new administration that's carrying over a lot of unfinished business from the first 4 years. So I think some of us will take a breath, but I know I've moved from our local block club gathering in someone's basement to eagerly watch over brunch this historic inauguration 4 years ago to, in my case, working at home myself. My National Day of Service will be finishing funding proposals and getting a couple of project reports done for funders so I can keep my door open and make payroll this spring.
Yes, please keep the door open.
Interesting turnabout, though. I somehow feel like that's not the right way to fully participate in this, as I said, secular liturgical experience that we call the inauguration.
I think the best way is, the service day.
Absolutely.
Moving it to the acknowledgement that it's the Martin Luther King holiday, and that was correctly turned into a service day some years back, and that way you don't have to pay attention to too much of the politics. Yeah, I was there 4 years ago, and I was glad to be
great. I was so glad
there
you
4
went.
years ago with the cadre that drove out there from Chicago, and we think of it fondly, but it is a different era now. It is a different time, and the undone business is a real pain in the neck to all of us, and I can't even speak to what I'd like to say if Congress were listening.
Well, I have a question for you as someone who worked so hard on both campaigns. We heard this week a pretty significant shift in what the Obama apparatus that organized the campaign is going to do.
Tell me what, because I was watching iguanas.
Well, they're going to form a new 501c3. Organizing for America is going to get set up with old campaign staffers to basically support the president's agenda moving forward the next 4 years.
They do
separate
know
from
some
the
of us-
Democratic Party.
They do
separate-
some of. They do know some of us have been doing that for a while, right?
Well, I find it curious because
That's okay. That's okay.
when we were asked
We'll catch 'em
election
up.
night 4 years ago, what should we do with the list?
Right.
There was this big debate about
There was a
whether,
pause.
whether the White House should hang on to the list or whether the party should get the list.
Right.
And, you know, I said, let it go to the grassroots, which
Right.
of course is not what they decided to do. And I think, quite frankly, certain initiatives the president did try to get to, including Obamacare, might have been far more successful if the apparatus, if the list, had been let go of and let that grassroots activity flourish.
Yeah. Who knows what would have happened to the midterm elections as
Exactly.
well.
Well, speaking of midterm elections, we'll have them again in 2014. And
Yep.
one of the things that I, on this very topic, was concerned about was how we would, you know, try to get the majority in the House to hold the Senate, et cetera. And where was the White House on making that happen? And I talked to Jan Schakowsky on the show last week, and that is on youtube.com/heartlandmedia.
Was that a good show, Michael?
I thought it was really good.
Good.
I talked to her for an hour, and I got to say, Jan did sort of come out on the Palestine-Israeli question. She certainly seemed more
Meaning
progressive.
she's gay?
No, she means she's not just sort of blindly following Israel.
I gotcha.
And
I gotcha.
but I did say I was concerned about 2014, and I really thought we had to put a lot